In the humid darkness of a Thai prison, a man waits. His muscles remember jungle warfare. His mind replays traumas that 3 years of penal labor have not erased. He is not a hero in the classical sense, he is a weapon that was built, deployed, abandoned, and now sits in storage, collecting rust and rage. When Colonel Troutman descends into this concrete purgatory with an offer of presidential pardon in exchange for one more mission, the transaction is not patriotic. It is the reactivation of a dormant asset. John Rambo agrees not because he loves his country, but because the alternative is to remain a forgotten ghost in a system that has no further use for his specific, lethal skills. This is the foundational economics of Rambo, First Blood Part 2, a film that disguises itself as jingoistic spectacle but reveals, under forensic examination, a profound meditation on the valuation of human capital in the machinery of empire. The production budget for this 1985 blockbuster is a contested figure in Hollywood accounting. Studio records and industry databases present two distinct numbers, $44 million and $25.5 million. This discrepancy is itself a lesson in entertainment finance. The higher figure likely represents the full capital commitment including marketing and distribution overhead, while the lower figure may reflect the direct negative cost. Regardless of which metric one accepts, the investment was substantial for a sequel to a modestly budgeted 1982 sleeper hit. Carolco Pictures, the independent production company behind the film, was making a leveraged bet on Stallone's proven commercial gravity and the suddenly lucrative POW narrative that had captured the American imagination. The risk was not trivial. A failure at this budget level would have crippled the fledgling Carolco. Instead, the film became the second highest-grossing domestic release of 1985 and the third highest worldwide, converting approximately $300 million in global box office from an initial outlay that delivered an ROI multiple between 6.8 and 11.8 depending on the denominator used. The creative engineering of this film is as layered as its financing. The screenplay credits list Sylvester Stallone and James Cameron, with a story by Kevin Jarre, 3 distinct creative capital contributions that generated significant friction in the development process. Cameron, then emerging from The Terminator, was hired based on a recommendation from David Giler and produced a first draft titled First Blood 2, The Mission. His version emphasized action and featured a tech-savvy sidekick for Rambo, with the first violence erupting approximately 30 to 40 pages into the script. Stallone, assuming script duties after Cameron's draft, fundamentally reoriented the narrative. He stripped away the sidekick, accelerated the action timeline, and injected what he termed the politics, the ideological confrontation between a cynical bureaucracy and a traumatized veteran. Cameron would later claim he wrote the action and Stallone wrote the politics. Stallone would counter that any assertion beyond this constituted doing the backstroke badly in a pool of lies. This creative tension, this collision of directorial and authorial egos, generated a hybrid text that is neither pure Cameron adrenaline nor pure Stallone melancholy, but something stranger and more resonant, a blockbuster that cannot decide if it is celebrating warfare or mourning its human costs. The film opens with an image of imprisonment. Rambo, introduced performing hard labor under a blazing sun, is the American soldier reduced to its most naked economic essence, a body producing work in exchange for subsistence. His release from this state is contingent not on justice, but on utility. Troutman does not argue that Rambo deserves freedom. He argues that Rambo is uniquely qualified for a mission that must be deniable, invisible, and expendable. This is the foundational logic of special operations forces in the post-Vietnam era. The soldier is not a citizen with rights, he is an asset with capabilities. His value is determined by the alignment between his skills and the state's objectives. When that alignment shifts, the asset is written off. Rambo knows this calculus intimately. He has already been written off once. His agreement to the mission is not trust in his government but a gamble that this time, he can control the terms of his own deployment. The target of this deployment is not a conventional enemy but a wound in the American psyche. The POW issue in 1985 was a live cultural nerve, inflamed by a decade of advocacy, conspiracy theory, and Hollywood amplification. Films like Uncommon Valor and Missing in Action had already staked claims to this territory. Rambo, First Blood Part 2 entered a crowded market of narratives about abandoned soldiers, each offering different ideological prescriptions. What distinguishes this film is its insistence that the abandonment is not accidental but intentional, not bureaucratic incompetence but systemic policy. Marshal Murdoch, the civilian bureaucrat overseeing Rambo's mission, is not a villain of negligence. He is a villain of calculation. He tells Troutman directly, evidence of live POWs would force the United States to expend resources, or possibly even start another war to secure the release of a bunch of forgotten ghosts. This is cold, unadorned cost-benefit analysis. The lives of prisoners are weighed against the political and financial expense of their recovery. The prisoners lose. This is the film's radical, uncomfortable thesis, buried beneath explosions and one-liners. The state that sends its soldiers to war is the same state that calculates their lives as liabilities on a balance sheet. Rambo's rage is not generic action hero fury. It is the rage of a man who has discovered his own disposability. The extraction of John Rambo from his Thai prison cell is the film's first major transaction, a deal struck between a colonel who understands sacrifice and a bureaucrat who understands budgets. Troutman offers freedom, Murdoch offers funding. Rambo is the currency exchanged between them. This opening sequence establishes the film's governing metaphor, the soldier as financial instrument, whose value fluctuates according to the strategic priorities of his holders. Troutman's valuation of Rambo is based on witnessed performance under extreme duress, a history of successful mission execution that constitutes an irreplaceable human asset. Murdoch's valuation is based on political optics, the utility of a clean, deniable operation that can be publicly claimed if successful or covertly discarded if not. These competing valuation frameworks will collide catastrophically in the film's second act, when Murdoch's spreadsheet logic meets Rambo's embodied refusal to be treated as a line item. The audience, trained by decades of action cinema to anticipate the hero's triumph, is subtly being prepared for a different kind of victory, not military, but accounting. The aerial insertion sequence is a masterclass in narrative risk management. Rambo, parachuting into the Vietnamese jungle, becomes entangled in his own lines. He hangs beneath the canopy, a suspended target, forced to cut himself free and jettison most of his specialized equipment. This is not mere complication, it is strategic downsizing. Stripped of radios, explosives, and advanced weaponry, Rambo is reduced to his core components, a knife, a bow, and the accumulated tactical software of his Green Beret training. The production's allocation of resources here mirrors the character's predicament. The filmmakers understood that excessive gadgetry would distance the audience from the physical reality of Rambo's predicament. By forcing him to operate with minimal technological advantage, they reinvest narrative capital in the one asset that cannot be budgeted away, Stallone's physical presence, the musculature and movement vocabulary that had become, by 1985, its own genre. This is lean storytelling, a deliberate restraint of spectacle in service of sustained tension. Ko Bao enters the narrative as a contractual intermediary. She is the local intelligence asset, the human bridge between Rambo's American operational framework and the Vietnamese environment he must navigate. Her introduction is economical but not perfunctory. Julia Nixon's performance communicates competence, vulnerability, and a quiet desperation that mirrors Rambo's own. She, too, is an asset deployed by forces she does not fully control, promised rewards that may never materialize. Her dream of escaping to America is the same currency Troutman used to purchase Rambo's cooperation, the promise of a new life in exchange for one last mission. The parallel is precise and unspoken. Both characters are investing their lives in a promissory note issued by a government with a documented history of default. The audience, knowing this history, watches their partnership form with the uneasy awareness that this particular portfolio carries extreme counterparty risk. The river pirate sequence introduces the theme of bad faith contracting that will consume the film's moral center. Ko negotiates passage upriver, exchanging Rambo's American dollars for the pirates' local knowledge and transportation infrastructure. The transaction appears straightforward, currency for service. But the pirates, recognizing the superior firepower of the approaching Vietnamese gunboat, recalculate their position. They determine that betraying Rambo yields higher expected value than honoring their agreement. This is rational choice theory illustrated in miniature, a demonstration that contracts are only as durable as the enforcement mechanisms backing them. In the jungle, beyond the reach of courts and regulators, the only enforcement is reciprocal violence. Rambo kills the pirates, not in rage but in settlement. The transaction is completed at gunpoint. The lesson is not lost on the audience. If river pirates will betray for short-term advantage, what will a Washington bureaucrat do when the political winds shift? The POW camp Reconnaissance is the film's quietest passage and its most emotionally complex. Rambo, having confirmed the presence of American prisoners, faces his first major moral dividend decision. His orders are explicit: photograph, document, do not engage, do not rescue. The mission's designers want evidence, not intervention. But the evidence is a man named Banks, who looks at Rambo with the desperate hope of the long abandoned. Rambo's choice to free Banks is presented as spontaneous compassion, but it is better understood as the inevitable outcome of his character's core psychological programming. Rambo does not defect from his orders, he defaults to his identity. He is a soldier, and soldiers do not leave their comrades to die. This is not politics, it is professional ethics. The cost of this choice will be catastrophic: aborted extraction, recapture, torture, but Rambo makes it without visible calculation. The decision is instantaneous because the calculus has already been performed across a decade of training and 3 years of penitentiary reflection. Some contracts cannot be signed. Some orders cannot be obeyed. The extraction betrayal is the film's structural and emotional pivot. Troutman, aboard the rescue helicopter, sees Rambo and Banks pinned down by enemy fire. He radios for permission to engage. Murdoch, monitoring from the safety of the command center, denies the request. Lifer, the helicopter crew chief, holds Troutman at gunpoint to enforce the abort order. The helicopter departs. Rambo watches his rescue evaporate into the sky. This sequence is not merely a plot complication, it is the revelation of the film's true antagonist. Murdoch is not a corrupt individual. He is a functionary executing policy. The policy is that soldiers are acceptable losses when the cost of their recovery exceeds the political benefit. Rambo, abandoned for the second time by his government, finally understands his position in the national accounting ledger. He is not a hero. He is a rounding error. This knowledge transforms him. The man who emerges from captivity is no longer seeking redemption or pardon. He is seeking reconciliation of accounts. The torture chamber is where the film's ideological contradictions crystallize into something approaching philosophy. Rambo, strapped to an electric generator, is interrogated by Soviet Lieutenant Colonel Podofsky, a villain whose cosmopolitan cruelty perfectly counterpoints Murdoch's bureaucratic detachment. Podofsky demands that Rambo broadcast a message to his American handlers, a public confession that will discredit further rescue missions. The Soviet represents an older model of tyranny, visible, physical, unambiguous. Murdoch represents an emerging model, managerial, statistical, deniable. Both seek to use Rambo as a medium for messaging. Both treat his body as an interface between policy and public perception. The difference is that Podofsky's methods leave scars while Murdoch's leave only spreadsheets. The film, despite its reputation for simplistic patriotism, refuses to endorse either system. It shows us torture and abandonment as symmetrical expressions of the same fundamental premise, that the individual soldier is a tool to be employed or discarded according to the needs of the institution. Rambo's capitulation to his torturers is one of the most misunderstood moments in 1980s action cinema. He does not break because the pain overwhelms his will. He breaks because Banks, the rescued POW, is brought before him and threatened with eye gouging. Rambo's resistance is not a function of his own pain tolerance but of his responsibility to others. When that responsibility is weaponized against him, his strategic calculation shifts. He can absorb electric shocks indefinitely. He cannot absorb the knowledge that his defiance will cost another man his eyesight. His compliance is not weakness. It is a reassessment of the utility function. The mission parameters have changed. The objective is no longer information denial but hostage preservation. This is the tactical flexibility that made Rambo an elite soldier. It is also the moral complexity that his critics, then and now, consistently overlook. He does not surrender, he adapts. POWs' infiltration of the camp is the film's most elegant narrative engineering. She enters disguised, locates Rambo, and facilitates his escape with the precision of a trained operative. Their flight through the jungle is a compressed romance, two damaged people finding momentary synchrony. She tells him her dream, America, a new life, the forgetting of war. He offers no promises, Rambo never promises, but his silence communicates something his words cannot. When Lieutenant Tay's bullet finds her, the film performs its most brutal emotional transaction. Ko dies in Rambo's arms, her blood staining his chest, her final words an instruction to remember. He cuts a red headband from her dress and dons her necklace. These objects are not souvenirs. They are capital conversions. Her life, invested in him, is transformed into obligation. He will remember. He will complete the mission she died enabling. He will, in some fashion that neither of them could have articulated, love her across the boundary of death. This is the film's only genuine romance, and it is conducted entirely in the language of sacrifice and memorial. The guerrilla warfare sequence that follows is often read as simple vengeance fantasy, a cathartic release of pent-up violence after the prolonged captivity sequence. This reading is not incorrect, but it is incomplete. Rambo's systematic elimination of the Vietnamese and Soviet forces is also a demonstration of asymmetric warfare economics. He possesses minimal material resources, a bow, explosives he manufactures from captured components, his own intimate knowledge of the terrain. His opponents possess helicopters, automatic weapons, numerical superiority, and the infrastructural advantages of a fortified camp. Despite this disparity in capital endowment, Rambo achieves overwhelming tactical superiority through superior allocation of his limited resources. Every arrow finds a vital target. Every explosive is placed to maximize structural damage. Every engagement is concluded before the enemy can effectively retaliate. This is not magic, it is the practical application of Special Forces doctrine. The film, beneath its muscular surface, is a textbook on the force multiplication achieved through training, intelligence, and will. The helicopter duel between Rambo's captured gunship and Podofsky's Mi-24 is the film's most expensive sequence and its most explicit genre self-consciousness. Two machines, each representing billions of dollars in military R&D, are piloted by two men whose personal histories embody the Cold War's human infrastructure. The sequence is choreographed with the precision of a ballet, each maneuver calculated to exploit the opponent's tactical doctrine. Rambo, the irregular, improvises. Podofsky, the conventional commander, follows procedure. The former's adaptability defeats the latter's rigidity. John Rambo arrives in First Blood Part 2 as a completed psychological artifact. Unlike the traumatized drifter of the original film, who discovered his capacity for violence in reaction to small-town persecution, this Rambo already knows exactly what he is and what he can do. 3 years of penal labor have not rehabilitated him, they have concentrated him. His psychological profile is that of a weapon that has been test-fired, evaluated, and placed in long-term storage. The prison has not reformed his values or adjusted his moral calculations. It has merely suspended his operational capacity. When Troutman offers him reactivation, Rambo's acceptance is not a choice among alternatives but the resumption of an interrupted identity. He is, in the deepest sense, a professional. His profession is violence in service of the state. The state has temporarily declined his services. Now it requires them again. His psychology accommodates this fluctuation because it must. The alternative is to acknowledge that his entire adult identity has been built on a relationship of reciprocal obligation that his government has already repudiated. This acknowledgement, fully formed, would be paralyzing. Rambo avoids paralysis not through denial but through displacement. He transfers his demand for reciprocity from the abstract state to the concrete individuals he encounters, Troutman, whom he trusts, Murdoch, whom he will eventually confront, Ko, whom he will love and lose. Each relationship becomes a proxy for the larger settlement he cannot directly negotiate. Colonel Troutman represents the acceptable face of military authority, the compassionate patriarch who mourns the men he must send into danger. His psychological function in the narrative is to embody the possibility that the system can be humane, that orders can be issued with genuine concern for those who execute them. Richard Crenna's performance is calibrated to communicate this warmth without sentimentality. Troutman does not apologize for the mission or pretend it carries no risk. He acknowledges the costs honestly while emphasizing the necessity. This is leadership as it is taught at military academies, the commander who shares the danger, who visits his men in prison, who fights for their recognition even when the bureaucracy has already written them off. Yet Troutman is also complicit in the system that produced Murdoch. He has spent his career training soldiers for a government that calculates their lives as liabilities. His personal decency does not alter the institutional logic that ultimately abandons Rambo. He is the tragic figure of the loyal officer who believes, against all evidence, that his loyalty will be reciprocated. His final conversation with Rambo reveals the limits of his psychological adaptation. He cannot imagine a life outside the institution. Rambo, having been twice discarded, can imagine nothing else. Marshal Murdoch is not a villain in the conventional sense. He is not corrupt, sadistic, or personally malevolent. He is a manager performing his assigned function with professional competence. His psychological architecture is structured around the optimization of organizational outcomes. He evaluates Rambo's mission not as a moral endeavor but as a project with defined objectives, allocated resources, and acceptable loss thresholds. When the mission parameters shift, he recalculates. The cost of extraction exceeds the political benefit of recovery. Therefore, extraction is aborted. This is not malice, it is algorithm. Murdoch's tragedy is that he has perfected a professional identity that systematically excludes the very humanity his organization ostensibly exists to protect. He can speak of forgotten ghosts without irony because he has genuinely forgotten that the ghosts were once men. His fear when confronted by Rambo is not the fear of a guilty conscience. It is the fear of a functionary who has suddenly realized that the spreadsheet cannot stop bullets. His psychological collapse is the collapse of a worldview that mistook models for reality. Podofsky and Yushin, the Soviet antagonists, represent a different psychological type, the professional sadist whose violence is not a means to an end but an expression of identity. Podofsky's interrogation of Rambo is technically competent. He extracts the required broadcast through calculated application of pain. But his methods carry an emotional excess that Murdoch's never do. He enjoys the work. This distinction is crucial to the film's moral architecture. Murdoch's abandonment of Rambo is more damning than Podofsky's torture because it is committed without passion, without investment, without any recognition that its object is a human being. Podofsky, at least, acknowledges Rambo's humanity by attempting to break his will. Murdoch never attempts to break Rambo's will because he has already discounted Rambo's will as irrelevant to his calculations. The Soviet enemy is visible, comprehensible, defeatable. The bureaucratic enemy is invisible, incomprehensible, and ultimately victorious. Rambo can kill Podofsky. He can only threaten Murdoch. The film understands, even if its audience sometimes does not, which enemy poses the greater threat to the soldier's sense of self. Ko Bao is the film's most compressed psychological portrait and its most tragic. She is introduced as a professional, a Vietnamese intelligence asset whose skills complement Rambo's own. But her professionalism is a survival adaptation, a mask over the displaced person beneath. Her dream of America is not merely a fantasy of economic opportunity, it is a desperate hope for psychological integration. In Vietnam, she is compromised, an agent of the enemy working with the former enemy, trusted by neither. In America, she imagines, she could become simply herself, unmarked by the conflicting loyalties that define her present existence. Her death forecloses this possibility. Yet her final instruction to Rambo, remember, transforms her from victim to investor. She deposits her identity, her aspiration, her unfulfilled potential, into his keeping. The red headband he cuts from her dress and the necklace he dons are not sentimental keepsakes. They are her shareholdings in his continued existence. He will carry her forward because she has no other vehicle for continuation. This is love as an economic transaction conducted at the outer limit of what either party can afford. The cost is her life. The dividend is his memory. Banks, the rescued POW, is a minor character who performs a major psychological function. He is the embodied evidence that the POW MIA issue is not a conspiracy theory but a lived reality. His trauma is visible in his eyes, his posture, his inability to fully comprehend that rescue has actually arrived. Banks does not speak of his captivity, his silence communicates everything. He is what Rambo would have become if he had never escaped Vietnam, if the prison walls had held him for 12 years instead of months. His presence forces Rambo to confront the contingency of his own survival. The difference between them is not courage or skill or will. It is luck, timing, the accidental alignment of operational priorities with political opportunity. Banks is Rambo's shadow self, the version of John Rambo that exists in the conditional tense. His rescue is therefore also a form of self-rescue, an acknowledgement that the soldier's debt to his captured comrades can never be fully discharged because the captured comrades are also versions of himself. This psychological complexity is almost entirely subtextual, communicated through glances and silences rather than dialogue. But it is present, a buried structure beneath the explosions, giving the violence an emotional weight it would otherwise lack. The film's final psychological statement is delivered in Rambo's walk away from Troutman. He does not run, strut, or celebrate. He walks, slowly, heavily, into an uncertain future. The speech he has just delivered, demanding that his country care for its soldiers as they care for their country, has not resolved his internal conflict. It has merely articulated it. Troutman's question, "How will you live?" receives an answer that is not an answer, day by day. This is not the declaration of a man who has achieved peace or integration. It is the declaration of a man who has abandoned the search for permanent settlement and committed himself to the ongoing management of his own trauma. He will survive. He will not heal. The film, for all its reputation as mindless entertainment, refuses the therapeutic narrative that would resolve Rambo's pain through catharsis or romance or victory. He has won the battle, rescued the prisoners, killed the villain, and confronted his betrayer. He remains fundamentally broken. This is not a failure of the film's psychology. It is its most sophisticated insight. Some wounds do not close. Some debts are never paid. The soldier walks on, day by day, because the alternative is to stop walking, and he is not yet ready to stop. That is not triumph. It is endurance. And for a man who has been declared surplus to requirements by every institution that ever claimed him, endurance is its own form of victory. The financial performance of Rambo, First Blood Part 2 represents one of the most dramatic risk conversions in 1980s Hollywood. The production budget, whether calculated at $25.5 million or $44 million, positioned the film as a major capital commitment for Carolco Pictures, an independent production company that had pre-sold foreign distribution rights to raise necessary funding. This financing structure, increasingly common in the decade's independent sector, transferred significant downside risk to international distributors while allowing Carolco to retain substantial upside participation. The strategy succeeded beyond reasonable projection. The film generated $150,415,432 in domestic box office and approximately $150 million internationally, yielding a worldwide gross of $300.4 million. Against the lower budget estimate, this represents an 11.8x multiple of production cost, a return that would justify any hedge fund's most aggressive position. Against the higher estimate, the 6.8x multiple remains exceptional, particularly for an R-rated action sequel tracking against the inherent uncertainty of audience taste. The film's domestic theatrical run demonstrates the economic power of sustained exhibition. Opening on May 22, 1985, in 2,074 theaters, it achieved an opening weekend gross of $25,520,843, a record for TriStar Pictures at that time and the fifth-largest Memorial Day weekend opening in inflation-adjusted history. More remarkable than the opening was the film's theatrical longevity. It remained in the weekly top 10 for 18 consecutive weeks, accumulating theatrical engagements totaling 25,873 screenings across its run. The legs multiple, the ratio of total gross to opening weekend, was 5.89, indicating exceptional word-of-mouth and repeat business. This performance pattern reveals a fundamental truth about the film's audience economics. It was not merely a marketing-driven opening, it was a sustained cultural event that drew viewers repeatedly and maintained theater traffic through the competitive summer season. Each additional week of exhibition represented incremental revenue with minimal marginal cost, converting the initial production investment into an annuity that paid dividends across nearly 6 months of theatrical presence. The Q2 1985 box office ranking places Rambo, First Blood Part 2 in its proper competitive context. With $105,635,733 earned during the April-June period, it substantially outperformed its nearest competitor, Police Academy 2, their first assignment, which generated $49 million. The film accounted for approximately 12% of the entire quarter's box office among the top 50 releases, a concentration of market share that demonstrates the blockbuster economics increasingly characteristic of 1980s exhibition. This performance validated the franchise strategy Carolco had pursued and established a template for the studio's subsequent productions, including the even more expensive Rambo 3 and the monumental Terminator 2: Judgment Day. The film's success also demonstrated the viability of the POW narrative as commercial IP, a discovery that competitors quickly exploited through the Missing in Action series and numerous independent productions. The market responded to demonstrated demand with accelerated supply, a classic pattern of capitalist adaptation that saturated the subgenre within 3 years of this film's release. Inflation-adjusted analysis reveals the film's true economic scale. The domestic gross of $150.4 million in 1985 translates to approximately $446 to $479 million in contemporary valuation, depending on the adjustment methodology applied. This places the film among the top 50 domestic releases of all time when measured by tickets sold rather than nominal currency. The international performance, when similarly adjusted, suggests a worldwide audience exceeding 300 million admissions across the film's initial release and subsequent reissues. This is not merely a successful film, it is a demographic event, a moment of mass cultural participation that transcends the normal boundaries of commercial cinema. The implied valuation of the Rambo intellectual property following this performance was astronomical. Stallone, who had negotiated significant back-end participation, achieved personal compensation in the tens of millions. Carolco, which had risked its existence on the film's success, became a major independent player capable of commanding premium financing terms. The entire entertainment industry adjusted its expectations for the commercial ceiling of R-rated action product. The marketing expenditure associated with Rambo, First Blood Part 2, is not precisely documented in available financial records, but the scale of the campaign can be inferred from its artifacts and cultural penetration. The film's poster campaign, particularly the Bow-style B1 sheet, achieved sufficient iconic status that Sylvester Stallone personally intervened to halt its production, intending to reserve the imagery for his own corporate branding. This is an extraordinary testament to marketing effectiveness. A promotional image designed to sell movie tickets was perceived by the film's star as possessing independent commercial value sufficient to justify trademark protection and corporate application. The poster did not merely advertise the film, it became an asset in its own right, a piece of visual intellectual property with standalone licensing potential. This is the highest achievement of marketing engineering, the collapse of distinction between the product and its promotion, the transformation of advertising into art, the conversion of promotional expenditure into brand capital. The merchandising campaign for Rambo, First Blood Part 2, extended far beyond conventional theatrical exhibition and into consumer segments that generated significant ethical controversy. Products including the Rambo electric train and battle set, the Rambo combat rifle target game set, soft and safe, grenades recommended for children age 5 and older, and Rambo black flak bubble gum manufactured to resemble shrapnel were marketed directly to preschool and elementary school demographics. This merchandising strategy deliberately targeted consumers who were legally prohibited from purchasing tickets to the R-rated film that inspired the products. The cognitive immaturity of children under 8, who cannot reliably distinguish advertising from reality, was exploited to convert the film's violent imagery into toy revenue. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, in their contemporaneous At the Movies broadcast, identified this practice as a fundamental ethical failure in the entertainment industry's approach to child-directed marketing. The controversy reveals the economic logic of franchise extension operating without the constraint of social responsibility. The film's commercial success created derivative demand that the licensors were structurally incentivized to satisfy, regardless of the appropriateness of the product-to-audience match. This is not anomalous exploitation but systematic capture of the juvenile consumer market by content rating systems that are legally enforceable only at the point of theatrical admission, not at the point of toy purchase. The long-term financial valuation of Rambo, First Blood Part 2, extends far beyond its initial theatrical run. The home video release, first on VHS and Laserdisc, later on DVD, Blu-ray, and digital platforms, has generated revenue streams across 4 decades. Each new format transition represents a recapitalization event, an opportunity to sell the same intellectual property to the same consumers under the justification of technical superiority. The film's availability on subscription streaming platforms provides ongoing licensing revenue with zero marginal production cost. Its status as a cultural touchstone ensures continued physical media sales to collectors and enthusiasts. The cumulative post-theatrical revenue almost certainly exceeds the theatrical gross, though precise accounting is obscured by studio portfolio reporting conventions that do not isolate individual titles. What is certain is that the film's economic productivity has not diminished with age. It remains an income-generating asset on Carolco's successor entities' balance sheets, a perpetual annuity purchased with the 1985 production investment and still paying regular dividends 39 years after its initial public offering. The cinematographic engineering of Rambo, First Blood Part 2, was entrusted to Jack Cardiff, a legendary figure whose career extended from Technicolor innovations in the 1940s to this muscular 1980s action spectacle. Cardiff, an Oscar winner for Black Narcissus and a pioneering director of photography whose work defined the visual language of Powell and Pressburger's greatest films, brought an unlikely artistic pedigree to the Vietnamese jungle. Citation 2, citation 6, citation 10. His appointment represents a fascinating allocation of creative capital. The producers could have selected any of a dozen competent action cinematographers working in the mid-1980s. Instead, they chose a 70-year-old master of painterly composition whose previous credits included The Red Shoes and The African Queen. The risk was substantial. Cardiff's methods, developed over decades of large-format Technicolor production, might have been incompatible with the faster, more aggressive shooting style required for a contemporary action film. Yet the gamble paid extraordinary dividends. Cardiff's framing of the Vietnamese landscape combines documentary authenticity with romantic grandeur. His lighting of Stallone's physique transforms the actor's body into sculptural form. The visual language of the film is not merely functional, it is artistic in ways that exceed the generic requirements of its production category. The widescreen aspect ratio of 2.35 to 1, achieved through anamorphic Panavision lenses, was a deliberate strategic choice with significant technical and economic implications. Citation 2, citation 10. Anamorphic photography requires more light than spherical formats, increasing the capital investment in lighting equipment and the time required for setup and adjustment. It imposes compositional disciplines that restrict flexibility in post-production reframing. It demands higher precision in focus pulling and camera movement, requiring more experienced and expensive camera crews. Yet the format's expansive horizontal canvas proved essential to the film's visual argument. The 2.35:1 frame contains the jungle's depth, the helicopter's movement, the crowded chaos of the POW camp. It communicates scale without requiring the production to actually achieve scale through expensive set construction or location photography. This is lens-based world-building, an optical illusion of grandeur achieved through glass and geometry rather than concrete and steel. The cost-benefit calculation favored anamorphic acquisition despite its higher production expense because the format's expressive capabilities aligned precisely with the narrative's requirement for epic visual rhetoric. The color palette of Rambo, First Blood Part 2, performs sophisticated semiotic work beneath the audience's conscious awareness. Cardiff and director George P. Cosmatos saturated the Vietnamese sequences in deep greens and browns, a chromatic immersion in the jungle's organic density. Citation 2, citation 4, citation 10. These earth tones communicate danger and concealment, the environment as both sanctuary and threat. The American command center, by contrast, is rendered in cool blues and neutral grays, the color of screens and steel and conditioned air. The opposition is not merely spatial but chromatic. Rambo moves between these color systems, never fully belonging to either. His own costuming undergoes a significant color transition across the narrative. The prison uniform is drab, institutional, anonymous. The black tank top and green trousers of his combat configuration are functional, adaptive, environment-coded. The red headband he adopts from Co is the film's only saturated primary color, a wound of pigment against the organic palette, marking him as the bearer of her memory and the agent of her unfinished purpose. This is not decoration, it is narrative economics, extracting maximum meaning from minimal chromatic investment. The physical production encountered significant infrastructural constraints that shaped its final visual form. Principal photography occurred primarily in Mexico, with Estudios Churubusco in Mexico City serving as the base of operations and the surrounding countryside standing in for Vietnam. Citation 4. This location strategy was driven by cost considerations. Mexican production expenses were substantially lower than equivalent shooting in Thailand or the Philippines, but it imposed creative limitations that required compensatory innovation. The Mexican landscape does not precisely replicate Southeast Asian topography. Cardiff and Cosmotos compensated through selective framing, atmospheric filtration, and the strategic deployment of vegetation appropriate to both regions. The effect, for most audiences, was persuasive. The gap between represented and actual geography was closed through cinematographic virtue. This is the economic logic of Hollywood production geography in miniature. Capital seeks lower-cost jurisdictions, and creative labor is tasked with closing the resulting representational gaps. The success of this effort is measured in audience non-recognition of the substitution. By this metric, the Mexican production achieved its objective with near-complete success. The editing architecture of Rambo, First Blood Part 2, supervised by Mark Goldblatt and Mark Helfrich, represents a distinctive philosophy of action sequencing that differentiates the film from both its predecessor and its imitators. Citation 2, Citation 4, Citation 6. The average shot length in the combat sequences is substantially longer than contemporary action standards, permitting the audience to track spatial relationships and choreographic logic without disorientation. This editorial restraint required exceptional performer competence. Stallone had to execute extended physical sequences without the safety net of rapid cutting to conceal imperfect execution. The approach also demanded precise previsualization and thorough rehearsal, both of which consume production time and therefore production capital. The editor's justification for this expenditure was the specific nature of the Rambo character. He is not a superhero, he is a highly trained soldier whose effectiveness derives from tactical intelligence rather than supernatural power. The editing language must therefore communicate his competence through sustained observation rather than fragmented suggestion. The audience must see what he does to understand why it works. This is editorial philosophy subordinated to character psychology, a creative constraint that paradoxically liberates the sequence from the generic conventions it might otherwise replicate. Jerry Goldsmith's musical score is the film's most sophisticated technological artifact, a symphonic composition that operates independently of the images it accompanies. Citation 2, Citation 4, Citation 6. Goldsmith, one of Hollywood's most accomplished and versatile composers, rejected the synth-heavy aesthetic that dominated 1980s action scoring in favor of a full orchestral palette augmented by Vietnamese ethnic instrumentation. The main theme, with its ascending brass fanfare and pulsing rhythmic foundation, communicates heroic aspiration without descending into jingoistic bombast. The action cues employ complex metric modulation, shifting time signatures to track the unpredictable rhythm of combat. The love theme for Rambo and Co. is scored for solo flute and strings, a moment of genuine tenderness that the film's dialogue could never articulate. This is musical engineering of the highest order, the translation of narrative and emotional content into acoustic information. Goldsmith's score does not merely accompany the film, it completes the film, supplying emotional dimensions that the production's other creative departments could not independently generate. The music's durability as a concert suite and its continued presence in the action scoring vocabulary testify to its exceptional technical and artistic quality. The sound design of Rambo, First Blood Part 2, was recognized by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences with a nomination for Best Sound Effects Editing at the 58th Academy Awards. Citation 4. This institutional acknowledgement validates the exceptional technical achievement of the film's audio team, who engineered a sonic environment of unprecedented density and detail. The helicopter sequences required the synthesis of rotor dynamics, engine characteristics, weapons discharge, and environmental acoustics into a coherent auditory image that communicated spatial position, tactical status, and emotional tenor simultaneously. The bow and arrow, the film's signature weapon system, received bespoke sonic treatment combining the twang of compound bow mechanics, the whistle of arrow in flight, and the distinctive impact of broadhead against flesh and bone. The torture sequence's electrical effects were synthesized from multiple source recordings to produce a sound simultaneously mechanical and organic, machine-like and bodily. This is not decoration, it is information architecture, the organization of acoustic data to support narrative comprehension and emotional response. The Academy nomination, while not resulting in a win, certified the film's sound department as operating at the highest professional standard, an achievement rarely acknowledged in critical reception of blockbuster action product. The production management of Rambo, First Blood Part 2 required the coordination of multiple corporate entities operating across distinct legal and financial jurisdictions. Carolco Pictures, the independent production company founded by Mario Kassar and Andrew Varner, functioned as the primary creative and financial engine, aggregating capital from international pre-sales to fund production. Citation 4, Citation 6, Citation 10. TriStar Pictures, a joint venture of Columbia, HBO, and CBS, acquired domestic distribution rights, providing additional production funding in exchange for theatrical and television exploitation rights. Citation 1, Citation 4, Citation 5. Anabasis Investments, a Netherlands Antilles corporation, appears in production credits as a financing vehicle, its offshore status suggesting tax optimization structuring. Citation 1, Citation 4. This multi-entity governance structure was characteristic of the independent production boom of the 1980s, a period when traditional studio financing models were supplemented by increasingly complex international co-production arrangements. The administrative burden of managing these relationships, each with distinct contractual obligations, reporting requirements, and profit participation definitions, was substantial. The production's ability to execute creatively while satisfying the informational demands of its multiple financial principles represents a significant organizational achievement. The physical production was supervised by Buzz Feitshans, a veteran producer whose credits included the original First Blood and who would continue with the franchise through its third installment. Citation 2, Citation 4, Citation 6. Feitshans confronted exceptional logistical challenges arising from the production's location strategy. Shooting in Mexico with a primarily American cast and crew required the importation of personnel, equipment, and materials across international borders, each movement subject to customs inspection, work permit verification, and transportation scheduling. The jungle environments where significant action sequences were photographed lacked the infrastructural support systems of studio backlots. Power generation, water supply, sanitation facilities, catering services, and emergency medical response all required dedicated planning and deployment. The production's ability to maintain schedule and budget under these conditions reflects exceptional organizational competence. Each day of shooting in remote location represented approximately $250,000 to $400,000 in direct costs before accounting for star compensation or post-production overhead. Schedule slippage of even 1 week would have imposed additional millions in expenditure. Feitshans and his team did not merely manage a film production, they operated a mobile industrial enterprise in austere environmental conditions. Sylvester Stallone's role in the production extended far beyond his on-screen performance. As screenwriter of the final draft and, by some accounts, uncredited creative consultant throughout principal photography, Stallone functioned as a co-producer in all but contractual title. Citation 4. This concentration of creative authority within a single individual, star, writer, and de facto creative executive, represents an unusual organizational structure with both advantages and vulnerabilities. The advantage was decisive creative coherence. Stallone maintained consistent vision from script development through post-production, eliminating the friction that often arises when these functions are distributed across individuals with competing priorities. The vulnerability was key person risk. Stallone's health, availability, and creative engagement were necessary conditions for project completion. His contractual disputes or personal crises would have paralyzed production with no alternative path to resolution. The organizational structure that emerged around Rambo, First Blood Part 2, was thus a deliberate bet on Stallone's exceptionalism, an investment of decision-making authority in a single individual whose talent and commercial value justified the concentration of control. This bet succeeded, but its success should not obscure the exceptional nature of the organizational design. The directorial assignment to George P. Cosmatos represented a calculated management decision following earlier creative turbulence. Cosmatos, a Greek-Italian director with a mixed record of European productions and Hollywood genre films, was selected after Stallone reportedly rejected the initial director choice and assumed greater creative control. Citation 4. Cosmatos's reputation as a director capable of executing a producer's vision without asserting strong authorial claims likely contributed to his hiring. The production required a director who could manage the technical complexities of large-scale action sequences while deferring to Stallone's authority on script, character, and tonal matters. Cosmatos fulfilled this function with professional competence, delivering sequences of adequate technical quality without creative friction. His subsequent career, including the Stallone-scripted Cobra, followed a similar pattern of producer-friendly direction. This is not a criticism, it is an acknowledgement that different production contexts require different leadership models. A strong auteur would have conflicted with Stallone's creative control and potentially destabilized the production. Cosmatos's willingness to function as an executive administrator rather than an artistic visionary was precisely the organizational asset the project required. The pre-sale financing model employed by Carolco Pictures represented a significant innovation in 1980s independent production. Kassar and Varner traveled to international film markets, Cannes, Milan, Los Angeles, with scripts, concept art, and Stallone's commitment, selling territorial distribution rights to foreign buyers before production commenced. Citation 4. These pre-sales provided non-recourse funding that did not require repayment if the film was never completed or if completed product failed to satisfy contractual specifications. The risk was transferred from the production company to the international distributors, who advanced funds against anticipated box office performance in their territories. This model enabled Carolco to finance productions at scale without the creative constraints imposed by traditional studio financing. It also created complex contractual obligations to deliver specific creative elements, star, director, runtime, MPAA rating, that had been promised during pre-sale negotiations. The production management team was thus required not only to make an excellent film but to make the specific film that had been contractual promised to dozens of international partners. This added compliance burden increased the administrative complexity of production without correspondingly increasing creative resources. The model's success in the case of Rambo, First Blood Part 2, validated its viability and encouraged its replication across the independent sector, contributing to the production boom of the late 1980s and early 1990s. The post-production schedule was compressed by the contractual release date of May 22, 1985, a Memorial Day weekend positioning that maximized opening potential but imposed inflexible delivery deadlines. Citation 1, Citation 4, Citation 5. Editing, sound design, music recording, color timing, and answer print production had to be completed within a window that permitted no slippage. This temporal discipline required exceptional coordination among post-production vendors. Goldblatt and Helfrich cut picture while Goldsmith composed and recorded score. The sound team designed effects for sequences that existed only as rough assemblies, the laboratory-timed prints based on digital color references rather than final answer prints. Each department operated with incomplete information about the other's work, trusting that the integration phase would resolve discrepancies. This is high-risk project management, the compression of sequential workflows into parallel processing with minimal margin for error. The system succeeded because each department operated at exceptional professional standard and because the production had invested sufficiently in pre-production planning that post-production corrections were minimized. The film delivered on schedule. The contractual obligations to international distributors were satisfied. The Memorial Day opening achieved record grosses. The post-production schedule, invisible to audiences, was nonetheless essential to the film's commercial performance and, therefore, to the realization of its economic potential. The historical accuracy of Rambo, First Blood Part 2, is not a matter of factual correspondence but of emotional and political resonance. The film's engagement with the POW/MIA issue reflects not documentary reality but the lived experience of a significant portion of its audience. By 1985, a decade after the fall of Saigon, the question of whether American prisoners remained in Southeast Asia had become less a factual inquiry than a cultural symptom. The war's psychological wounds had not healed, they had been suppressed, displaced, and periodically reasserted through the mechanism of advocacy and conspiracy. The film's assertion that POWs were intentionally abandoned by a government unwilling to expend the resources required for their recovery was not, in 1985, a fringe position. It was a widely shared belief among veterans, their families, and the substantial portion of the American public that had lost confidence in the institutions responsible for the war's conduct and aftermath. The film's historical accuracy is therefore not empirical but experimental. It corresponds not to what happened but to what many Americans believed had happened, and its power derived from this correspondence between cinematic narrative and popular conviction. The Soviet military presence in Vietnam depicted in the film requires careful historical qualification. The Soviet Union did maintain military advisors in Vietnam throughout the post-war period, and Soviet-Vietnamese military cooperation intensified following Vietnam's 1978 invasion of Cambodia and the subsequent Sino-Vietnamese War of 1979. However, the film's depiction of Soviet combat forces operating helicopters and participating directly in prisoner interrogation significantly exceeds documented historical reality. Soviet advisors trained Vietnamese personnel and provided equipment, including the Mi-24 helicopter that Podolsky pilots in the climactic duel, but they did not, to public knowledge, engage in the direct combat operations the film depicts. Citation 4. This historical compression, the substitution of Soviet for Vietnamese agency, serves multiple narrative functions. It updates the Vietnam conflict to contemporary Cold War concerns, aligning the film with Reagan-era anti-Soviet rhetoric. It provides a villain of equivalent technological status to the American hero, correcting the perceived unfairness of a war fought against a less industrialized enemy. And it externalizes American guilt about the war's human costs by displacing responsibility onto the Soviet system that supposedly directed the communist war effort. The accuracy of this depiction is less important than its utility. The film uses the Soviet presence as a narrative device, not a historical argument. The tactical procedures depicted in the film represent a complex negotiation between authentic special forces doctrine and dramatic necessity. Rambo's use of the bow and arrow as a primary weapon system is, from a strictly operational perspective, eccentric. Special Operations Forces in 1985 were equipped with suppressed firearms offering superior range, accuracy, and ammunition capacity. The bow's selection is therefore aesthetic and thematic rather than documentary. It communicates Rambo's connection to indigenous warrior traditions, his tactical creativity, and the primitive authenticity that distinguishes him from technologically dependent conventional forces. However, the film's depiction of guerrilla warfare methodology, concealment, terrain utilization, captured equipment adaptation, psychological operations, reflects accurate special forces doctrine. Rambo's campaign against the Vietnamese camp is not random violence but systematic destruction of enemy combat capability through prioritized targeting and calculated withdrawal. These tactical sequences, while compressed and stylized for dramatic purposes, emerge from authentic operational principles. The film is not a training film, but it is not pure fantasy either. The character of Co Bao raises questions about the representation of Vietnamese people in American Vietnam War cinema. She is, like many such characters, a bridge figure, sympathetic to the American cause, desiring American life, ultimately sacrificed to motivate the American hero. This representational strategy is historically problematic. It reduces the complexity of Vietnamese experience during and after the war to a single narrative function: assistance to and sacrifice for American soldiers. The millions of Vietnamese who suffered and died in the war, including those who fought against American intervention, are absent from this representational economy. Ko is not a character in the sense of a fully realized human being. She is a narrative instrument, valued for her utility to the protagonist and his mission. This criticism is not anachronistic moralizing. Contemporary Vietnamese American critics and veterans identified this representational failure in 1985, and the film's subsequent critical reassessment has acknowledged the legitimacy of their concerns. The historical accuracy of Company's depiction is not a matter of costume or language accuracy, it is a matter of fundamental representational justice. By this metric, the film fails significantly. The cinematographic language of Rambo, First Blood Part 2, was shaped by the collaboration between director George P. Cosmatos and cinematographer Jack Cardiff, an unlikely pairing whose creative tension produced a distinctive visual signature. Cardiff, 70 years old during principal photography, brought a European pictorial sensibility developed across 4 decades of international production, citation, 2, citation, 4, citation, 6. His training in Technicolor 3-strip photography, the most technically demanding color process in cinema history, had instilled an intuitive mastery of hue, contrast, and composition that younger cinematographers educated in faster, looser production methods could not match. Cosmatos, a director of action-oriented genre films, required the technical competence Cardiff supplied while benefiting from the aesthetic surplus his presence generated. The resulting imagery exceeds the generic requirements of 1980s action cinema. Frames are composed with attention to balance, depth, and color relationship that would be appropriate for prestige dramatic production. This is not merely competent cinematography, it is cinematography that significantly elevates the material it documents. Cardiff's contribution to the film's commercial and critical success is difficult to quantify but impossible to deny. The 2.35:1 anamorphic format imposed compositional disciplines that shaped every aspect of the film's visual design, citation, 2, citation, 10. The horizontal canvas required Cardiff to organize figures and environmental elements across a wide axis, creating compositions that read laterally rather than vertically. This orientation proved particularly effective for the jungle sequences, where the density of vegetation could be arrayed across the frame to suggest depth and concealment without resorting to rapid cutting. The helicopter sequences, filmed with the same anamorphic lenses, achieved a sense of spatial scale impossible in narrower formats. The Mi-24 attack helicopter, an imposing machine in any aspect ratio, became truly monstrous when its width was allowed to fill the expanded frame. These compositional choices were not merely aesthetic, they were narrative. The wide frame communicated the scale of Rambo's challenge and the magnitude of his eventual victory. Cardiff and Cosmatos did not simply photograph the film, they wrote it in the language of lens and composition, adding layers of meaning that the script alone could not supply. The lighting philosophy of Rambo, First Blood Part 2, distinguishes it from both its predecessor and its contemporaries. Cardiff rejected the high-key, even illumination characteristic of much 1980s television-influenced production in favor of motivated, selective lighting that sculpted forms and defined space through shadow, citation, 2, citation, 10. Stallone's musculature, the film's most important visual asset, was rendered through aggressive side lighting that emphasized every contour and striation. The jungle environment was illuminated with sources that simulated dappled sunlight penetrating canopy, creating pools of visibility in seas of green darkness. The command center sequences employed cool, fluorescent-motivated sources that communicated the bureaucratic sterility of Murdoch's domain. Each lighting design was calibrated to the emotional and thematic requirements of its scene. The film never looks generic because its lighting is never generic. This specificity required significant time and capital investment. Cardiff's slower, more methodical approach extended setup hours and consumed crew resources. The producer's willingness to accommodate his methods reflects their understanding that the film's visual quality was not merely decorative but essential to its competitive positioning in the crowded 1985 summer marketplace. The color grading of the film, executed photochemically through printer light adjustments rather than digital manipulation, achieved a chromatic unity that contemporary digital color correction often struggles to replicate. The green palette of the jungle sequences was not achieved through desaturation of competing colors but through careful selection of location, wardrobe, and production design elements that naturally harmonized with the intended dominant hue. Costumes were dyed, sets were painted, and locations were selected with reference to their chromatic properties. This pre-production color design required exceptional planning and eliminated the possibility of late-stage correction that digital grading permits. The risk was substantial. If the selected colors failed to harmonize in the final print, no post-production adjustment could rescue the footage. The reward was a visual coherence that appears organic rather than applied, as though the film emerged from its environment rather than being imposed upon it. This is the difference between painting and dyeing, between surface application and integral saturation. Cardiff's method dyed the film green at the molecular level of production design. The color does not sit on the surface, it radiates from within. The focus pulling on Rambo, First Blood Part 2 deserves specific attention as a technical achievement of the highest order. Anamorphic lenses at 2.35:1 have shallower depth of field than equivalent spherical lenses, making precise focus critically important and exceptionally difficult. The film's action sequences, shot with wide apertures to achieve acceptable exposure in jungle conditions, required focus pullers to track moving subjects through unpredictable choreography while maintaining razor-thin planes of critical sharpness. The sequence of Rambo moving through the camp, bow raised, target acquired, is a continuous demonstration of this technical virtuosity. Stallone's face remains crisp while the background dissolves into soft suggestion. When he fires, the arrow briefly occupies the focal plane before the rack follows it to the target. This is not cinematography, it is choreography of lens and light, a performance by the camera department that parallels the physical performance of the actors. The audience does not consciously register this achievement, they experience it as clarity, immersion, the absence of the technical friction that would distract from narrative engagement. Invisible excellence is the highest form of craft, and the focus department achieved it consistently across 96 minutes of complex production. The film's visual effects, minimal by contemporary standards, were executed through practical means that have aged more gracefully than the digital composites of later decades. Explosions were detonated on set, their light and smoke interacting with Cardiff's lighting in unpredictable, organic ways. The destruction of the Vietnamese gunboat was achieved through a combination of full-scale pyrotechnics and miniature photography, the latter executed with sufficient craft that it seems remain invisible to casual viewing. The helicopter crash sequences employed full-size mock-ups and remote-controlled aircraft, photographed at sufficient distance and speed that their practical limitations become advantages rather than liabilities. These practical effects required substantial upfront investment in materials, personnel, and safety protocols. They consumed more production time than digital alternatives would have required. But they produced imagery that remains convincing 39 years later, unaffected by the accelerating obsolescence that has rendered so much 1990s and 2000s CGI dated and artificial. The film's visual effects have not depreciated because they were not speculative assets. They were expenditures on tangible phenomena that continue to perform their original function without degradation. This is not technological conservatism but technological wisdom, the recognition that some methods produce durable value while others generate only temporary advantage. Jerry Goldsmith's musical score for Rambo, First Blood Part 2, is one of the most accomplished action compositions of the 1980s, a symphonic work of exceptional structural sophistication and emotional range. Citation 2, Citation 4, Citation 6. Goldsmith, already an Academy Award winner and multiple nominee, approached the assignment with the same serious craftsmanship he brought to his concert works and his more prestigious dramatic scores. The main theme is constructed around a rising four-note motif that ascends by perfect intervals, communicating aspiration, determination, and eventual triumph. The harmonic language is essentially tonal but incorporates modal inflections that suggest Southeast Asian musical idioms without descending into exoticist caricature. The orchestration deploys the full resources of the symphony orchestra, brass for heroism, strings for tenderness, percussion for action, supplemented by ethnic flutes and percussion instruments that color the ensemble without dominating it. This is not generic action scoring, it is specific, original composition that could be extracted from the film and performed in concert without embarrassment. The fact that such exceptional work was commissioned for a Sylvester Stallone action sequel is remarkable evidence of Carolco's production values and Goldsmith's professional integrity. The integration of Goldsmith's score with the film's sound design represents a sophisticated audio mix strategy that prioritizes dramatic coherence over documentary realism. In the torture sequence, the score's dissonant string clusters and percussion pulses function as acoustic extensions of the electric current passing through Rambo's body. The sound effects of the generator and the musical representation of its application are not merely simultaneous, they are synthesized, each reinforcing the other's emotional impact. In the helicopter duel, Goldsmith's brass fanfares compete with the rotor dynamics and weapons discharge in a carefully balanced mix that permits neither element to dominate. The audience experiences the sequence as both visceral and heroic, grounded in physical reality and elevated to mythic dimension. This integration is not accidental, it is the product of intensive collaboration between Goldsmith and the sound department during the post-production mixing process. The music and effects tracks were not assembled independently and combined at the final stage, they were developed together, each adjusted to accommodate the other's requirements. This collaborative model is more expensive and time-consuming than sequential processing, but it produces audio of exceptional density and coherence. The dynamic range of the film's sound mix was exceptional for 1985 theatrical exhibition and remains impressive on contemporary home theater systems. The quiet passages, Rambo and Co. in the jungle, Troutman's tense negotiations with Murdoch, the aftermath of the torture sequence, are recorded at levels that require the listener to lean forward, to attend carefully to whispered dialogue and environmental ambience. The action sequences then erupt with full-force impact, the percussion of Goldsmith's score and the detonation of practical effects engaging the entire frequency spectrum. This contrast is not merely technical, it is psychological. The quiet passages condition the audience to listen closely, to invest attention in the narrative. The loud passages reward that investment with cathartic release. The pattern repeats across the film's duration, creating a rhythmic alternation of tension and discharge that synchronizes with the narrative's structural alternation of reconnaissance and combat. The sound mix is therefore not merely an enhancement of the film, it is a parallel organization of audience experience, a sonic scorecard that tracks the emotional arc as precisely as Goldsmith's musical notation. The film's dialogue recording and ADR, automated dialogue replacement, were executed to the technical standards expected of major studio productions. Stallone's vocal performance, characterized by low volume and restricted pitch range, required careful microphone placement and post-production level adjustment to achieve intelligibility without sacrificing the character's distinctive vocal quality. His lines are often delivered at the threshold of audibility, forcing the audience to lean into his presence as other characters lean into his authority. Richard Crenna's Troutman speaks in the clear, projected cadences of military command, his dialogue recorded with sufficient presence to cut through ambient noise without sounding artificially isolated. Charles Napier's Murdoch employs the clipped, efficient rhythms of bureaucratic communication, his dialogue often terminating before the audience expects, leaving silence to complete his sentences. These vocal characteristics are not merely performance choices, they are engineered audio signatures, each calibrated to communicate character through the specific acoustic properties of recorded speech. The film's sound team understood that dialogue is not only semantic content but sonic material, and they shaped that material with the same care they devoted to effects and music. The surround sound presentation of Rambo, First Blood Part 2, in its original 35mm magnetic stereo prints and subsequent home video releases represented state-of-the-art theatrical audio technology, citation, 2, citation, 6, citation, 10. The helicopter sequences were mixed with particular attention to spatial positioning, the rotor sound panning across the sound stage as the aircraft tracked across the frame. The jungle environment was rendered with ambient effects distributed across multiple channels, creating an acoustic envelope that surrounded the audience with bird calls, insect activity, and distant water flow. The climactic duel positioned the antagonist's helicopters in distinct quadrants of the sound field, enabling the audience to track their relative positions through audio alone. This spatial design required the mixing team to conceptualize the film's geography in 3 dimensions, to anticipate how sound would move through theatrical space and how that movement would support narrative comprehension. The result is a soundtrack that does not merely accompany the image but extends it, providing information and experience that the visual channel alone cannot supply. The audience does not only watch the helicopter duel, they inhabit it, positioned acoustically between the combatants as they maneuver for advantage. The Academy Award nomination for Best Sound Effects Editing recognized the film's exceptional achievement in the specialized craft of non-musical audio production. Citation 4. The sound effects team, whose individual members are not identified in available production records, created original audio assets for the film's signature weapon systems and action sequences. The bow and arrow combination, the film's most distinctive acoustic signature, required synthesis of multiple source recordings, the mechanical tension of compound bow limbs, the friction of arrow against rest, the aerodynamic whistle of fletching in flight, and the wet impact of broadhead against organic target. These elements were combined in variable proportion to communicate distance, velocity, and terminal effect. The electric torture device generated a sound simultaneously mechanical and biological, the hum of machinery and the involuntary response of human tissue to applied current. The helicopter rotor systems were recorded from multiple aircraft types and positions, then mixed to achieve the specific acoustic character of Soviet and American rotary platforms. Each of these effects required original recording, editing, and mixing labor that consumed significant post-production resources. The Academy nomination certified this investment as achieving the highest professional standard. The film's audio legacy extends to its subsequent home video releases, which have progressively upgraded the original sound design to contemporary technical specifications. The 5.1 Dolby Digital surround tracks on DVD and Blu-ray editions expand the spatial resolution of the original theatrical mix while preserving its essential character. Citation 2, Citation 6, Citation 10. The recent 4K Ultra HD release, though not documented in search results, would presumably include a Dolby Atmos immersive audio presentation that further dimensionalizes the sound field. Each format transition represents an opportunity to recapitalize the original audio investment, extracting additional value from assets created in 1985 through the application of contemporary playback technology. This is the economic logic of catalog title exploitation. The original production costs are sunk, the marginal cost of format upgrades is modest, and the addressable market of consumers willing to repurchase familiar content for superior technical presentation is substantial and recurrent. The film's audio quality, exceptional for its period, has proven sufficiently durable to support this extended commercial life cycle. The same effects and mixes that impressed Academy voters in 1985 continue to satisfy consumers in 2024, a testament to the original engineering excellence and the format migration strategy that has maintained its commercial availability. The marketing campaign for Rambo, First Blood Part 2 must be understood as a two-phase operation with distinct objectives and execution strategies. The pre-release phase, commencing months before the May 1985 opening, focused on building anticipation among the core demographic of young adult males who constituted the primary audience for R-rated action product. This phase employed conventional media channels, television spots, print advertising, theatrical trailers, with exceptional production values that communicated the film's increased scale and ambition relative to its predecessor. The release phase, commencing with the Memorial Day weekend opening, shifted emphasis to sustaining momentum through positive word-of-mouth and repeat business. This phase exploited the film's exceptional audience satisfaction metrics, which generated the 5.89 legs multiple that distinguished its commercial performance from typical blockbuster front-loading. The campaign's success is quantifiable not only in opening weekend gross but in sustained theatrical presence. A film that merely opened well and declined rapidly would have generated inferior total returns. The marketing department's achievement was not only driving initial attendance but conditioning audiences to return and to recommend. The poster campaign for Rambo, First Blood Part 2 achieved iconic status rarely attained by genre cinema promotional materials. The bow-style B1 sheet, featuring Stallone in a crouched combat stance with bow extended and arrow notched, achieved such powerful graphic impact that Stallone personally ordered its production halted, intending to reserve the imagery for his personal corporate branding. This intervention, while commercially inconvenient for the studio and its licensing partners, represents an extraordinary testament to the poster's effectiveness. A promotional image designed to sell movie tickets was perceived by the film's star and producer as possessing independent commercial value sufficient to justify intellectual property protection and standalone exploitation. The poster's composition is deceptively simple. Stallone occupies the central vertical axis, his body forming a diagonal tension line from planted rear foot to extended forward arm. The bow's curve echoes the arc of his spine, creating a unified kinetic geometry. The background, a non-specific tropical environment, recedes into atmospheric haze, concentrating attention on the figure. This is not merely competent graphic design, it is visual branding of exceptional efficiency, compressing the film's entire value proposition into a single, unforgettable image. The demographic targeting of the marketing campaign extended beyond conventional media channels to include product licensing arrangements that placed Rambo-branded merchandise in distribution channels serving consumers ineligible to purchase theatrical tickets. The Rambo electric train and battle set, Rambo combat rifle target game set, soft foam grenades recommended for children age 5 and older, and Rambo black flak bubble gum manufactured to resemble shrapnel were marketed directly to preschool and elementary school demographics. This merchandising strategy exploited the gap between the Motion Picture Association of America's rating system, which restricted theatrical admission to persons 17 and older, and the absence of comparable regulation in the toy and novelty sectors. The cognitive immaturity of young children, who cannot reliably distinguish advertising from reality, was converted into revenue through the application of Rambo's brand equity to products whose packaging and marketing communications made no reference to the R rating that legally prohibited their target consumers from viewing the source material. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert identified this practice as ethically indefensible in their contemporaneous At the Movies broadcast. Their assessment remains persuasive. The international marketing strategy required careful calibration to avoid political controversy in territories with different relationships to the Vietnam War and its aftermath. The film's depiction of Soviet military personnel as antagonists, unproblematic in the United States, raised sensitivities in European markets with significant communist parties and in Asian markets with complex Cold War alignments. The international advertising materials accordingly de-emphasized the Soviet dimension of the narrative, focusing instead on Stallone's star persona and the film's action credentials. This localization strategy, executed market by market through tailored trailer assemblies and print advertising, added significant cost and complexity to the global marketing operation. It was justified by the exceptional international box office performance the film ultimately achieved. The $150 million international gross, approximately equal to the domestic total, demonstrates the effectiveness of this territorially adaptive approach. A uniform global campaign, insensitive to regional political sensitivities, would likely have underperformed in key international markets. The marketing department's willingness to customize its approach by territory, despite the additional expense and administrative burden, produced measurable return in expanded international market penetration. The tie-in licensing program extended across apparel, publishing, and interactive entertainment categories. Rambo-branded clothing, including the sleeveless tank top and red headband that constituted the character's signature costume, generated substantial licensing revenue while simultaneously functioning as free advertising for the theatrical release. Novelizations and comic book adaptations provided narrative extensions that captured additional consumer spending and maintained brand presence between film installments. Video game adaptations for contemporary home computer and arcade platforms converted the film's interactive potential into playable experiences, albeit with the technical limitations characteristic of 1985 gaming hardware. Each licensed product category represented a distinct revenue stream with its own production economics and distribution infrastructure. The licensing department's achievement was not merely signing agreements with qualified partners but managing these diverse relationships to ensure consistent brand presentation across disparate product categories. This required exceptional organizational capacity and contributed significantly to the franchise's total commercial valuation. The critical reception of the marketing campaign itself, distinct from the reception of the film, was mixed. Industry observers acknowledged the campaign's exceptional effectiveness in driving commercial performance while expressing reservations about certain tactics, particularly the child-directed merchandising program. The controversy generated by Siskel and Ebert's critique, amplified through their substantial national platform, created reputational risk that the studio managed through strategic non-response. No executive publicly defended the practice, no policy changes were announced, no licensing agreements were terminated. The controversy was allowed to dissipate through media cycle attrition rather than active management. This passive approach proved commercially rational. The merchandise continued to sell, the licensing revenue continued to accrue, the reputational damage, concentrated among critics and advocates already predisposed against the film, did not measurably affect box office performance. The marketing department's calculation, that the benefits of child-directed merchandising exceeded its costs, including controversy-generated reputational depreciation, was validated by subsequent events. No significant regulatory or legislative response emerged. No sustained consumer boycott materialized. The film's commercial success proceeded unimpeded. The critical reception of Rambo, First Blood Part 2, upon its 1985 release was substantially more negative than its commercial performance might suggest. The film earned 7 nominations at the 6th Golden Raspberry Awards, winning 4 categories including Worst Picture, Worst Actor for Stallone, Worst Screenplay, and Worst Original Song. This institutional condemnation, while partly attributable to the Razzie Awards' characteristic irreverence, nonetheless indicates genuine critical dissatisfaction with the film's quality and political orientation. Mainstream critics, many of whom had appreciated the original First Blood as a serious dramatic treatment of veteran trauma, found the sequel cartoonish, jingoistic, and dramatically regressive. The character of Rambo, they argued, had been reduced from a complex psychological portrait to a simplistic action archetype. The film's politics, whether read as right-wing triumphalism or liberal anti-war allegory, were judged crudely executed regardless of ideological valence. This critical consensus was not unanimous. Some reviewers appreciated the film's craft values and acknowledged its effectiveness as pure entertainment, but it was sufficiently dominant to establish the film as a critical liability for its participants. The Academy Award nomination for Best Sound Effects Editing provides a crucial counterpoint to the Razzie consensus. This recognition, awarded by the sound branch's technical peer group, certified the film's exceptional achievement in a specialized craft domain. The nomination demonstrates that the film's professional reputation within the Hollywood production community was more nuanced than its popular critical reception suggested. The same film that earned Worst Picture from the Razzies earned serious awards consideration from the Academy. This divergence is not contradictory, it reflects the different evaluative criteria applied by different communities of assessment. Critics, writing for general audiences, evaluated the film as narrative and political communication. Sound editors, evaluating the film as technical craft, recognized excellence in their specialized domain regardless of the narrative or political content it served. Both assessments are valid within their respective frames of reference. The film's legacy must accommodate both the Razzie humiliation and the Academy recognition, the critical dismissal and the craft respect. This is not a paradox to be resolved but a complexity to be acknowledged. Entertainment Weekly's 2009 ranking of the film as number 23 on its list of the best sock-em movies of the past 25 years represents a significant re-evaluation of the film's standing within popular culture. By this measure, the film was positioned alongside acknowledged classics of action cinema, its historical importance as a genre milestone outweighing its contested critical reputation. This ranking reflects the maturation of action cinema as a subject of serious critical and scholarly attention. The condescension that greeted 1980s action product in its original release has given way to more nuanced appreciation of the genre's formal properties, cultural significance, and enduring influence. The film's inclusion in this canonization exercise acknowledges its role in defining the visual and narrative vocabulary of modern action filmmaking, its contribution to the iconography of 1980s popular culture, and its continuing resonance with audiences who discovered it on home video and cable television rather than theatrical exhibition. The film's cultural impact extends far beyond its formal critical reception to encompass its role as a linguistic and symbolic reference point. The name Rambo entered the English language as a common noun denoting a solitary, muscular, violently resourceful protagonist, regardless of whether the character in question shares any narrative characteristics with John Rambo. This lexical entry, recorded in multiple dictionaries, represents an exceptional achievement in brand penetration. The film's dialogue contributed phrases to the popular lexicon, most notably, "Do we get to win this time?" which became a shorthand for conservative critique of Vietnam War strategy and, more broadly, for any demand that American military power be applied decisively rather than incrementally. The red headband and black tank top became immediately recognizable visual signifiers, appropriated by Halloween costumers, political protesters, and advertising campaigns seeking to communicate aggressive determination. This lexical and visual penetration is not captured by box office grosses or critical reception metrics. It is, however, the most durable form of commercial success. The film's reception within veteran communities was substantially more positive than its reception among professional critics. Many Vietnam War veterans, regardless of their personal political orientations, appreciated the film's acknowledgement of their service and its dramatization of their grievances against a government they felt had abandoned them. The character of Rambo, however cartoonishly amplified for commercial purposes, expressed authentic emotions that many veterans recognized from their own experience: rage at civilian incomprehension, resentment of bureaucratic indifference, pride in military competence, grief for fallen comrades. This veteran validation, largely invisible to the critical establishment, was nonetheless real and commercially significant. Word of mouth within veteran networks drove substantial repeat business and generated the exceptional legs multiple that distinguished the film's box office trajectory. This veteran constituency became the core of the franchise's long-term fan base, supporting subsequent installments and maintaining the character's cultural presence across decades of diminished franchise activity. The film's legacy within the action genre is complex and contested. It is simultaneously credited with establishing the template for 1980s American action cinema and blamed for degrading the genre's dramatic ambitions. This dual assessment is not mutually exclusive. The film did establish conventions: the solo hero, the betrayed soldier narrative, the massive body count, the cathartic monologue, that subsequent productions replicated with diminishing returns. It also abandoned the psychological complexity and social criticism that distinguished its predecessor. Both statements are true, and the genre's subsequent evolution reflects both influences. The action cinema of the late 1980s and early 1990s produced films that amplified the sequel's excesses and films that sought to recover the original's dramatic seriousness. The Rambo franchise itself oscillated between these poles. This oscillation within the franchise and across the genre reflects the fundamental tension the 1985 film introduced between commercial calculation and artistic ambition, between the demands of spectacle and the responsibilities of representation. It is a tension that has never been resolved, and the film's legacy is to have made that irresolution visible and permanent. 1-3 John Rambo walks away from Colonel Troutman, from the base, from the mission, from the entire apparatus that summoned him from prison and attempted to discard him once his utility was exhausted. He walks slowly, heavily, without destination. His final words, "day by day," are not a plan but an acknowledgement that planning has become impossible. The soldier who spent his adult life executing missions with precise tactical calculation has entered a phase of existence that admits no strategy, no objective, no measure of success or failure. He will survive. He will not heal. He will continue because the alternative is to stop, and he is not yet ready to stop. This is not the triumphal conclusion that the film's reputation as jingoistic spectacle would predict. It is something stranger and more melancholy, a victory that feels like defeat, a freedom that feels like abandonment, a future that feels like extended endurance of an unendurable past. The film that critics condemned as mindless entertainment ends with a meditation on the impossibility of ending, on the perpetual recurrence of trauma, on the soldier's sentence to carry his war forever. The economics of this conclusion are as significant as its psychology. Rambo rejects Troutman's offer of reintegration into the society that twice abandoned him. He will not accept a presidential pardon, return to civilian employment, resume the interrupted project of American citizenship. His refusal is not ingratitude or pathology, It is rational calculation based on accumulated evidence. The state that pardons him today is the same state that imprisoned him yesterday and the same state that will, under sufficient pressure, discard him tomorrow. His value to the institution is contingent on his utility. When that utility declines, he will again become a liability to be written off. The only rational response to this permanent condition of contingent valuation is to refuse participation entirely. Rambo does not seek a better deal from the government. He opts out of the deal structure altogether. He will live day by day, outside the institutional frameworks that have alternately exploited and ignored him. This is not prosperity, it is autonomy. And for a man who has been an asset on someone else's balance sheet since his 18th birthday, autonomy is the only form of wealth worth accumulating. The film's relationship to the Vietnam War and its veterans is complex and contested. It exploited the POW/MIA issue for commercial purposes, converting genuine grief and unresolved trauma into box office revenue. It also provided cultural validation for veterans who had received little acknowledgement of their service and less understanding of their experience. It simplified the war into a morality tale of American innocence betrayed by corrupt institutions and evil adversaries. It also insisted, against the weight of official denial and public indifference, that American prisoners had been abandoned and that their abandonment was a national disgrace. These contradictory functions are not separable. The film did not exploit veterans or validate them, it did both, simultaneously, and the same veteran viewer could experience both exploitation and validation in the same screening. This is not a paradox to be resolved through more careful analysis. It is the fundamental condition of popular culture's engagement with historical trauma, and the film's enduring significance lies partly in its exemplification of this condition. The walk away from Troutman is the film's final, irreducible image. Rambo does not look back. He does not acknowledge the Colonel's farewell or respond to his implicit appeal for reconciliation. He simply walks, his massive back filling the frame, his headband a red wound against the tropical green. The camera holds on his departure longer than narrative economy would dictate, refusing to cut away to a more conventional closing image. This extended duration is itself a statement. The film will not resolve its protagonist's condition through death, romance, or social reintegration. It will not provide the catharsis that its violent action sequences seem to promise. It will simply observe the departure, the continuation, the indefinite postponement of ending. This is not a failure of dramatic construction, it is a refusal of dramatic falsification. The war that Rambo carries within himself will not end because the film ends. The audience will leave the theater and resume their lives, but Rambo will continue walking, day by day, through a landscape that offers no destination and no rest. Rambo is kin to the heroes of Hemingway and Conrad, men who have looked into the abyss and found that the abyss looks also into them. His speech impediment is not Stallone's limitation but the character's authentic incapacity to articulate experiences that exceed language's representational capacity. His violence is not solution but symptom, the externalization of internal damage that no external action can repair. His departure into an uncertain future is not evasion but acknowledgement. Some stories do not end, some wounds do not close, some wars are never over for those who fought them. The film that contains him is, beneath its muscular surface, a work of genuine mourning, not for the war that was lost, but for the soldiers who were lost in it and never recovered, either physically or psychically. This is the meaning that has accumulated across 39 years of viewing and reconsideration, deposited like sediment by successive generations who recognized in Rambo's silent endurance something of their own unresolved relationships to violence, authority, and abandonment. If you found this deep dive meaningful, my literature-loving friends, consider liking and subscribing so we can keep decoding the business and beauty of cinema together.